Welcome back to Firewatch Live. I'm Tom DeSorcy, and we're here again with Scott Metzler. In our last session, we talked about how leadership can disappoint people, especially when tough decisions have to be made. Today, we're focusing on something every leader faces at some point: risk. Leadership is risky work, especially when you become the face of change. People often resist change because it's uncomfortable, and as a leader, you'll be seen as the source of that discomfort. Scott will guide us through the challenges of leading change, how some people will do anything to avoid the discomfort, even working against the change or against you. We'll also discuss how important it is for leaders to create sustainable leadership practices, both at work and in their personal lives, to avoid burnout and to stay effective. Scott, it's great to have you back.
Tom, thank you. It's good to be here.
Not sure. I guess we've used the term risk in our sessions, or at least we haven't delved upon it, I guess. And so we'll talk more about that. When a leader becomes the face of change, that seems like such a, I'm thinking of the leader being the stoic person in charge that people follow to the edge of the battles. But you're the one that are as perceived as the source of change-related discomfort. Tell us more about that and taking the blame, I guess, right?
You bet. You bet. Yeah. So, this goes back to our earlier conversations about the idea that change and leadership are married. And so, without change, there's not a whole lot of need for leadership. We can usually manage our way through keeping things the same. But if we're going to get better tomorrow than we were today, that requires leadership. And as we know, human beings tend to have a fraught relationship with change. It feels uncomfortable. It feels scary sometimes. Often we perceive change as loss, and maybe that is a loss of comfort or a loss of control. So, whatever that loss is, a leader's job is to get to the bottom of it and have real conversation about just what's going on.
We you talk about risk, but is the risk worth the benefit, or is there a benefit in all the risk?
Yeah. Yeah. And, that is the central question when we're talking about change, especially adaptive change and, change that might challenge our values and our beliefs. We have to get to the bottom of the question: is it worth the discomfort and the work and the engagement we're going to ask people to undertake to take this journey with us? And if it's not, perhaps this isn't the change, or perhaps this isn't the time. And so, it's hard to come to the conclusion or to answer those questions in isolation. It always requires deep discussion with the people you're asking to undertake the journey.
How do you find in your practice of meeting leaders, talking to them, and they're obviously learning from you like we are in this series, but when they become afraid of taking the risk just because they know the experience, they shy away from it. Do you find that as a concern?
You bet. That's a big concern. And so, the most comfortable move is to not make the change, just to keep the status quo alive, to keep things the way they are today, so that we don't induce this discomfort both in ourselves and in others. And so, leadership is risky work. It also can be lonely work if we try to do it ourselves. And so, we find ourselves in a place, a quarter of the way through the 21st century, where we live in a complicated and complex world that doesn't really show any signs of getting less complicated and less complex. And so, the leadership move when change is afoot is to invite all of the people who are stakeholders, all of the people who will engage in the change, into the conversation, into this co-created space of leadership, so that we can ask the really tough questions, get to the really valuable answers, and sort of co-create this way forward into a new way of being and working.
When people take the risk, and now we're sort of warning them about the risk and saying that this is risky business, this is, be prepared for this.
Yeah.
Does I mean, is there a longevity to this? Is this just going to be, does risk last long, I guess is the question.
Yes, that's a great way to frame it. I think as long as we're exercising effective leadership, the risk is going to be there. It might change the way it looks and feels, but it's always going to be risky work. And an easy solution is to pretend like we know the answers and to pretend like we exactly know the outcome, and the truth of the matter is we don't. So anytime we embark on change, we're taking a risk, we're acting experimentally. And I think in our hearts, everybody knows that. And so when we as leaders or formal authority figures pretend that we have all of the answers, I don't think people really believe that. They might want to believe that, but I don't think they really do. And so the leadership move there is to be honest and to be transparent and to say, folks, here's the lay of the land today. Here's where we need to be tomorrow. And that journey might be dangerous and it might not be a straight path. It might not be a linear solution. We might have to learn some things and figure out some things that seem risky along the way, but that's how we're going to grow together.
I'm drawing the parallel of risk versus trust.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about trust in our time together. And, this is one of those times when we almost simultaneously make deposits into the trust bank by being honest about the risk and not trying to cover it up and not trying to pretend like what we're undertaking is not risky. That's a trust deposit move. And also withdrawing trust and asking people to come along with us anyway. So we're making two moves at one time almost.
Is it the demonstration of the risk? I guess people getting used to the fact that that you will take or you're making a risky decision. I mean, it's got to help with the buy-in, I guess, is the term we haven't used yet.
You bet, you bet. And so, top-down decisions, especially when those decisions require people to step outside of their comfort zones, um, you know, often it's tough to gain buy-in. And so as leaders, we find ourselves in a position where we're trying to sell people on the idea that this is a worthwhile undertaking. If we start this leadership journey from a place of curiosity and a place of invitation, where we might say, I don't know exactly how this is going to play out. Here's what I think. Here's where I think we need to go. Perhaps we could all come together and sort of crowdsource this leadership and put a bunch of smart people in a room together and come up with some really great contingency plans about how we might navigate this change together. At that point, instead of the decision maker or the authority figure selling someone an already developed plan, we've got buy-in from the ground up. So we've got this organic buy-in because people tend to support the things that they help create.
You used that word. I was going to jump on and say sounds to me like we have to do a little bit of selling, to a little bit of salesmanship, as it were, to try and get our point across, or our method to our madness, as it were. I mean, let's talk more about the selling of it. I mean, should you be spending a lot of time trying to pitch this?
Yeah. So the words selling and the words pitching, those are fraught words. And so if we find ourselves in a place as authority figures where we're having to pitch and sell and coerce, perhaps we've got the cart in front of the horse. Perhaps we haven't had the conversations that we need to have before we start taking the journey. And so, this idea of inviting people into the process early for a number of reasons. Number one, so that they can begin to process the cycle of change, which often parallels the cycle of grief. And so it's very normal, even with good positive changes, for people to experience those changes as loss and anger and shock and denial. That's just the normal way that our human brain processes change. Sometimes that only takes a few minutes. Sometimes that takes days and months and years. And so, the sooner we can help people begin to navigate those uncomfortable feelings that come along with change, the better we are in the long run. And then again, as we invite people into the process of conversation, we begin to co-create those solutions. So that really hopefully takes us out of the salesmanship role and puts us into this sort of collaboration role.
People talk about as what we're doing is, training leaders, telling people about how to be a leader. I wonder about evaluating a leader. If you were in that room and a person opened up the discussion with a sales pitch, wouldn't that concern you if they're always trying to sell a product before they actually tell you about it?
You bet, you bet. It would concern me a lot. And so again, the human brain is wired to be on the lookout for threats. And oftentimes when we encounter things that just that don't pass the sniff test, they don't look right, they don't smell right. I can't really tell you why in words, but I know that this seems risky or something seems a little off. When we encounter people selling things and trying to convince us of things that we're not necessarily familiar with or predisposed to agree with, that puts us on guard, that puts our defenses up on a subconscious level, which just makes the work of leading people through change in a positive and healthy way really, really tough. So we're almost shooting ourselves in the foot by selling before we have the necessary conversations.
And more to the marketing or the sales element or that analogy, in fact, that if people are used to, and again goes back to the trust factor, right? If people are used to you and know that what you're coming across with, they have that form of trust where it becomes, I would hope, leadership becomes less risky if that's possible.
Right. Yeah. And, another thing that occurs to me as we're having this conversation is the idea that, in the best possible of worlds, we invite people into the process and we help to, co-create these solutions. Sometimes that's not possible. And sometimes that's not appropriate. So it might be that the decision maker needs to retain the responsibility to make the decision, perhaps in isolation or perhaps with only a few advisors. And that's okay. That's not bad. But we have to figure out how we're going to overcome this idea of, how do we encourage buy-in? How do we get the rest of the organization to come along with us on this journey? And so I think the next best thing to inviting people into the decision-making process is to be very transparent about how the decision is made, why this is a good idea. And to do that before we have a trusting relationship is pretty darn risky.
In order for leadership to be risky, does change always have to be involved?
Yeah, I don't think so. So, one way I think leadership is risky is tied to change, associated with asking people to step out their comfort zones. The bigger the change, the bigger the departure from the normal, the bigger the risk. And so there are some very predictable ways people try to diffuse the risk. So maybe it is ensuring that the change doesn't succeed or ensuring that the leader doesn't succeed. But, this disappointment doesn't always have to be associated with change. And so, making decisions on behalf of an organization, whether it's 10 or 10,000 people, odds are decision makers are going to make decisions that don't please everyone. And that can be disappointing. That's just one of those timeless truths of leadership.
You make the comment that most people, which concerns me, that most people will do whatever it takes to make the discomfort stop.
Right. And so sometimes making the discomfort stop is a healthy process. Maybe it is self-reflection. Maybe it is, talking through the change with trusted colleagues and advisors. Maybe it is taking some time away from the conflict of change just to kind of sort things out and to just to process those feelings of loss and grief and anger and so forth. Sometimes it's not so healthy. And so sometimes people employ uh, nefarious strategies, is what I'll call it. Sometimes they'll say yes and they'll do no. And so it's this sort of under the radar dissension and opposition that is pretty dangerous, because if you and I have a disagreement and it is above board and we're honest about it and we're willing to have a conversation about it, we can navigate that if we know where one another stands, even if we don't agree. But when that opposition or dissension or resistance goes underground, that becomes a really different relationship. It's hard to talk about things that people aren't willing to be honest about. Sometimes people resort to gossip, sometimes character assassination, sometimes working to undermine a leader's credibility, all in an effort to decrease the pain associated with stepping outside of what we're comfortable with.
You talk about it, as you said just now, ensuring the change doesn't succeed, ensuring possibly that you don't succeed. And nefarious, that nice term. I was going to use the word sabotage, but I
Yeah,
think we're in the same discussion. And you also talk about taking you out. Explain this. This is really, there's no trust at all in this scenario.
that's right. That's right. And so when we operate from a leadership position without trust, almost all bets are off. And so when I say taking you out, I don't necessarily mean physically taking you out, but if I'm the decision maker and I'm making decisions that you don't agree with, and you find ways to make sure that my credibility is suspect, that I don't have the political capital to make these initiatives succeed. If you can make it appear to enough people that I don't have the leadership credibility or the leadership capacity to make good decisions, you've effectively taken me out. So I might retain the role of decision maker or authority figure, but perhaps you've robbed me of the power, which is different than authority, to make these changes stick and last and succeed. And so, as leaders, we need to be aware of what those things look like and what we might do.
Is this, in your words, this, I guess, is a further extension of passive aggressive behavior? Am I correct in assuming that?
You bet. You bet. Yeah. So again, if we disagree and we can have rational and productive conversations, uh, oftentimes we can navigate that rocky terrain and get to a place of mutual understanding. Maybe it's compromise. Maybe who knows how we might do that. But once the resistance becomes subversive, it's really difficult to bring those relationships and those people to productive compromise.
We speak or have spoken of leadership, and I think of it as a task specific role where we are, in the fire world dealing with a call and the operation. But now we're delving into leadership in general in terms of always being the leader, not necessarily leading a charge on a task specific. And that's where I get the idea that many leaders, and you this is your comment, many leaders fail to create sustainable leadership practices. So, this, and again, the activities that we talked about, people doing this nefarious activity, this is now becoming a problem. This is not, again, not affecting the actual task or operation that we're working on, but this is something that's a little bit more deeper, I would think, sort of behind the scenes.
You bet. You bet. So we've talked at length about the idea that leadership is deeply human work, that leadership is relational, and this is sort of the payoff. And so if we haven't done the work of meeting human beings where they are, understanding the needs they have that might not be fulfilled, that we might play a part in meeting those needs, if we haven't done the work of building good, trusting relationships, we might find ourselves in this place where we're being taken out and we might not even realize it. So yeah, in a very real way, the idea of making those regular, even small, but regular contributions to the trust piggy bank really, really are important when we're asking people to do things that feel dangerous and risky and uncomfortable.
We've alluded to the trust bank, and I think of the trust bank as being the people that trust you. At some point, you make your own withdrawals from that trust bank, I would think, as you have to trust yourself.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. And so, as it relates to this idea of sustainable leadership, it seems like the further someone ascends the hierarchy in an organization, the fewer and fewer people they have to talk about these things with. And so, your peer group gets smaller and smaller with every promotion. And if you end up at the top of the organizational hierarchy, your peer group is essentially yourself, right? And so developing trusted colleagues, developing people that you can workshop ideas with and brainstorm solutions with becomes really important to creating a sustainable practice of leadership. Without that, it's easy to second guess yourself. Without that, it's easy to get in your head and stay in your head and not make great decisions. And so, yeah, this idea of leadership really and necessarily being a team sport uh, uh, is the fact even at the top of the organization.
How can you have more sufficient support systems both on and off the job?
Right, right. So, yeah, developing relationships with colleagues outside of your organization or even outside of your discipline. So, other mid level managers or top level leaders, for example, is a great way to sort of solidify that team approach to leadership. Having colleagues who are not emotionally invested in the outcome of your particular challenges and who can give you an unvarnished and sort of bird's eye view opinion is really great. And then off the job, making sure that the people that you love and the people who love you, friends, family, understand the things that you're facing and going through on the job. And so maybe not at a granular level, they might not need to know the gritty details of what you're going through, but when you're facing hard times at work, it's really, really imperative to talk about those hard times with people who you trust and love.
Does this often result in ineffective leadership?
I think when we ignore the the needs that our mind and our heart and our bodies tell us we need, that lends to ineffective leadership. So anybody can do this hard job of leadership for a half an hour. A lot of people can do it for a week or two, but over the course of a career, it really takes thoughtful and meaningful development of relationships, both with the people who look to you for leadership and the people you can count on to support you when leadership becomes really, really hard.
More to the creation of the sustainable leadership practice, as it were, that you've said that this can also result in leaders that prematurely take themselves out of the game. Explain that.
You bet. You bet. Yeah. So when we are exercising leadership that is high risk, high consequence, perhaps high drama at times, that takes a toll on our intrinsic resources. It's hard on our brains, it's hard on our hearts, it's hard on our souls. And so if we can't develop practices and people around us to sustain us through those hard times, at a certain point, we begin to wonder, is this worth it? Is it worth sacrificing my health, for the practice of leadership? Is it worth sacrificing, perhaps my best days on leadership initiatives that don't seem to be popular, that seem to be really risky, that seem to, really engender resistance towards me personally? If we don't have those sustainable practices built around us, it might very well be that the most seductive answer is to simply tap out and to say, it's been a good run, but it's not worth it to me anymore. So we often lose really, really good leaders who possibly and probably could lead us to greater heights, because sometimes we're not very good at taking care of those leaders. Sometimes those leaders aren't very good at taking care of themselves.
Would you consider a leader by the one that takes themselves out of the game as how do you avoid the feeling of giving in?
Yeah. I think you avoid the feeling of giving in by doing the things that we've been talking about, and also realizing that if in fact it is better for my personal well-being to step away from this leadership role, perhaps that's not a surrender. Perhaps that's not a loss. Perhaps that is the way I need to take care of myself as a person. And so, when we lose those folks, perhaps that's the best thing for them.
It makes me think and refer back to the previous discussions, and maybe this is as a result of the the leadership truths that we are focusing on, and this is what it's doing for me, where all of a sudden I go, bang, leadership is human work. Remember, and I'm going,
Indeed.
bang, and maybe I have to keep as a leader telling myself that, and does that help in terms of taking the risk and having to remind yourself and that personal well-being that you need to address?
You bet. Yeah. And I think in that frame, this idea that leadership is human work, one of the best things we can do is talk about that. Talk about that with the people who look to us for leadership. Talk about that with our colleagues. And so, in a very real sense, a leader's job is to help people navigate this sea of change and come out the other end in a better place. In a very real sense, the way we can take care of leaders is to help them do the same thing. And so it's very much a push-pull relationship. Just as just as leaders have to take care of their people, it's important to understand that people could and should take care of their leaders too.
When you address people in person, and people that read what you have written, but in particular the face to face, because you can't understand what people read and how they feel, but in a room with again, here we are with the head nodding and the people getting it. I get that. I get what you're saying. But when you come to this topic, how is it received in terms of risk? Is this a surprise to a new leader that this is going to be part of the job? This wasn't what I signed up for, remember?
Right. With new leaders, with emerging leaders, often this is one of those light bulb moments like, hey, wait a minute. I thought once I got the promotion or once I got the corner office, it was going to be smooth sailing. And it's absolutely not. If we're doing effective leadership, if we're doing great leadership, if we're leading people on a human level, it's going to get messy, right? It's going to get risky. So, being upfront about that is important with emerging and new leaders, and oftentimes it is a surprise. What is a surprise to me is with tenured leaders, folks that have been around the block more than once. They get this sort of on an intuitive level, but sometimes this is new language for them, right? So I see the aha moment in, oh, I've been living this. This is my lived experience, but I didn't call it these things. And so now I have a language with which to have better conversations. And so that's really important as well.
So you find those people, that the seasoned leaders that didn't realize that the actual risk was being taken, and they were just
Right.
thinking that people didn't like them. Maybe what was the
Right.
reason? What's your explanation?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, yeah, when we have the language to have these conversations, we can become more clear about what's really going on. And so, hopefully, if you and I have a disagreement, we can come to a place where it's not that Tom doesn't like me or I don't like Tom. It's that I'm not comfortable with this new place we're going. And when we can refocus the discomfort from the person to the idea, then we can have really good conversations and come to new ways of understanding without this personal this personal rift.
We didn't talk much about or at all about risk being in terms of the operational decision making that may be at a fire ground, and certainly there is uh I guess a lot of consequence to some of the risk we have to take. And again, is that where the trust really comes through, when you have to make certain decisions that you really don't have time to be transparent or about or explain?
Right, right. Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. And again, I go back to the idea of the trust piggy bank. So if around the station, at the office, in the training room, on the drill grounds, in previous runs, we've been able to build this trusting relationship, it's going to be a lot easier for me to take these risky moves that you suggest I take if we've got that trust behind us. If not, that might be a different story. And so, one of the things that I remember from my early days as a firefighter in Kansas, where it gets cold from time to time, we were trained to come off the back of the truck with our SCBA masks on and ready to go. All we had to do was plug in and go to work. And so, if you've had an SCBA mask on in the winter, you know that they immediately fog up and it's hard to see, right? And so you're literally exercising blind trust in the company officer, right? So fast forward years later, we trained people not to come off the trucks with their mask on, because we wanted as many eyes looking out for hazards as we could, right? And so, it's not that we had a half an hour focus group meeting in the front yard of the house that's burning down, but very quickly we could have this sort of co-creation of leadership, right? So we're going to take the line to the backyard, and somebody might say, "Got it, Cap. Did you see the electrical line in the grass?" Right. So we're making our operations measurably safer by inviting people into this space of co-creating leadership.
Can a leader get to a point where they feel more comfortable and start to take more risk and feel good about it?
I think so. I think so. And so, I think that comes with repetition. I think that comes with practice. I think that comes with developing trusting relationships with the people who look to you for leadership. Absolutely.
Well, that's about it for today's session. Thanks, Scott, of Firewatch Live. And again, thanks for sharing your insights on the risks that leaders face when driving change. We hope you've gained some valuable takeaways on how to navigate these challenges while staying grounded. In our next session, we'll be discussing how to lead with integrity and why maintaining honesty and authenticity is critical in leadership, especially when things get tough. We look forward to having you with us for that conversation. Bye for now.